Hey fellow babies, welcome back to West Texas Bushcraft. Well, Tankerman Jake, your request is about to be fulfilled. I hope you enjoy this one. It's going to be pretty lengthy, but you know, if you're the only one that watches the whole thing, that makes me happy because I know that it was your request and hopefully you get the information you want. Now, what are we going to be doing today? Well, Mr. Tankerman Jake would like to see a little bit of step-by-step leatherworking. So, we're going to do that. It's going to be I'm assuming by step-by-step leatherworking that you're a beginner. So, I'm going to show you some of the basics and we're going to make a basic little pouch. So, what are we going to make? That right there. That's pretty cool. And why am I going to make one of these? Well, this is pretty awesome. When I got this Leatherman Sidekick, it came in this little pouch with this carabiner hooked on there. And I thought, okay, whatever. I got to using it. That thing's pretty handy. Not only can I keep my Leatherman in that, but I can also put like a fire kit or any other kit, a small first aid kit, whatever I want to in that. That's a pretty darn good multi-purpose pouch. Well, that got me to thinking too. I have this nice little Camillus rope working knife, and I like to use this thing at work all the time. The only problem with this is the bamboo handles. They just don't hold up to rattling around in my pocket with my keys and things like that, and it's just going to grind that bamboo down to nothing, and there's no pocket clip to keep it from falling all the way down in there. So I think we'll take this style and make a pouch for that knife. That one right there. Now why don't I just use this one? Well, because it fits, but it covers up that grommet there and I can't snap the carabiner around there. So we'll make that. That'll be a good simple project to start with. We will call this Leatherworking for Noobs. Yes, Leatherworking for Noobs. So this will be a good anchor point video for anybody learning a little bit about leatherworking from the beginning. So that way when we do other knife sheaths, you can refer back to this video on how to do different aspects of it, because I plan on trying to incorporate all the different kinds of things that I do to leather on this one pouch. So there we go. Let's stop the yammering and get started, huh? So I am using the same camera that I used on the billy pot stove. Finally learned how to work the thing, so let's hope like crazy that we don't lose any footage here, because that would suck in this situation. First of all, this is my toolkit that I use for leatherworking. I have all different kinds of tools in this thing, and if you're just starting out, I know darn good and well you don't have these tools, but I will be using these tools for this project and I will show them to you. And it's your choice whether you want to go purchase them or not. They're, you know, when you build up a set like this, especially if you buy it all in one shot, it's quite pricey. So it's definitely something to invest in over time. But there's good alternative methods to what I'm going to be using out of this kit here. And I will also fill you in on what the alternatives are as we're going through this. So we're going to start with the basics. Okay, first things first here. I got a nice little scrap piece of leather. This one ought to do just fine. I laid my knife out around on it, had a look at it just to make sure that all my pieces, in any way I would lay this out on this, would be big enough to do something with, and this is going to be more than enough. It's good tooling leather. It's fairly hard, so this will be good and durable. So when you go to do your leather, make sure you select a pretty decent piece. This one here I actually used on the Los Bastardo pack because there's a nice big scar in here that actually had a number in it from where the cow was branded, so I used it on that. I wish I could use it here because I like flawed material because to me it just looks cool. But I know on this one I won't be able to use this section because whenever they flesh this hide, they cut too far into it, so this is a good weak spot and that's going to fall apart, so I won't be using this piece here, but I can use from here up. So first thing I'm going to do here is I am going to lay my knife out, and basically what I want to do is trace around this thing of the size of this pouch that I want. Now remember, I'm going to be making one similar to this, so I want to stick with this kind of style. We're basically going to cut out a couple of ovals here, and I'm going to just kind of trace around my knife so that way I have a good idea of what my dimensions shall be. So I am going to size this up on the smaller piece versus the bigger one, because if I can make my smaller piece work for me, then I know I will be able to get that pattern out of the larger side. Kind of common sense, probably didn't need to know that, but that's okay. I wanted to make sure that everybody is up to snuff to what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to find me a nice little pencil, and it appears I don't have one in here, so I guess we're going to be using marker. Oh, there it is. There it is. Look like a marker. Okay, so I have a nice little pencil here. So I am going to just hold that down and just kind of roughly sketch out a shape that I want here. There you go. There's my pattern right there. Knife will slip right down in there like so. So I'm going to cut this out. I like to use, this is an NT cutter. It's just a snap blade knife. I like to use these because I get a little bit more precision. Sometimes people go with these big suckers, or you could actually just use a pocket knife that you got laying around, but I like this because it has more precision. I don't have to worry about sharpening. I can just snap the blade off to get a nice sharper edge. So let's cut this out. And the thicker the leather, of course, the harder it is to cut out. Sometimes you just got to score it and then go a couple of passes around it, but I think this is thin enough that I should be able to get what I want out of it. There we go. Go back and kind of clean that up. There we go. That looks pretty good. See, I even got a nice little scuff here. It's good to check both sides, but this was the only piece right here that was really bad. This isn't bad at all, so I'm not going to worry about that. That'll give it good character there. So now I take this and I will lay this on the other side. Straighten out that edge just a bit. It is a little crooked. Yeah, that's better. Alright, so now I'm going to take this and I'm going to lay this. I'm going to be able to use that scar, so that's pretty cool. I'm going to lay this across the edge here and up into this corner. So this way I minimize my waste. Because if one thing leather is, or if one thing leather is not, that would be cheap. Leather is expensive. It used to be pretty cheap when I did this a long time ago, but I was really shocked when I went to go buy materials for Los Bastardo. Okay, I have these nice little pieces cut out. One thing I will warn you of when you are working with leather, as you cut it out, especially raw leather like this that's not treated or dyed or anything like that, that will change shape on you, especially depending on the moisture in the air and the moisture on your hands as you're working with it. So what I want to do here is I want to kind of take this and size up my knife to it one more time. because since I'm going to emulate this one, I want to figure out where I want to put my stitches here. So when I had the sidekick in here, it went way down in there, so that way, and it had enough of it sticking up that I could grab it. So that's a pretty good idea. If it gets down in there too far, it's hard to get out. So I want to kind of judge where I want to put my stitches. So I have to be a little bit careful about that. So what I'm going to do is take my pencil, and I want about this much of the knife to stick up over my stitching so I can grab this or this part, depending on whatever kind of knife you're making this for. So I'm just going to make a mark here. And then I'm going to take a straight edge. We'll use this little sharpening kit here. Line these up nice and square. And I'm going to mark that same line across on the other piece. And then I do a lot of stuff by eye rather than sheer measurement. So I'm going to eyeball that, and I'm going to call that good on a good square angle right here. And I'm just going to put a little hash on the other side without drawing my line across the middle, because the idea here is when this is stitched over and you fold that over, you want to see as little bit of that as possible. Granted, it'll rub off over time, and especially if you dye it, it'll cover it up and it'll come off, but I haven't decided if I'm going to put any kind of dye or stain on this. But what I am going to do, for simplicity's sake, to make this easier to work with and easy to clean up, I'm going to take a little bit of contact cement, and I'm going to brush the edges over here where I'm going to stitch that down. So a little bit of contact cement, you can get this in the little quart cans, or you can get them in little small bottles about yay big, and it has a little dauber in it, which really kind of sucks because it's like a cotton ball on a metal stick, and that makes it hard for precision work. So I buy these little cheapo paint brushes at Harbor Freight for about, what, 59-69 cents a piece, and I buy them by the box. So I'm going to use that. And how you do this to make this effective is you come across and you lay down a good layer around your edges, and this is where I'm going to stitch. This is especially a handy thing to do, is to glue or use the cement on any kind of stitching areas on anything that's going to be a heavy duty usage, because it'll help reinforce your stitching and help whatever it is you're making from coming apart. So I'm going to do this to both of them. Now what you'll notice here, and this is going to be true whether you're doing leather or countertops or gluing wood together with this stuff, pretty much anything that's porous is dry, and as you can see, it has sucked up most of the moisture out of that little light layer I put on there. So what you do is you wait for this to dry till it's tacky to the touch, and then you do a second coat. Okay, word to the wise, if you're using contact cement, make sure you use a well ventilated area. It has some really nasty solvents in here. Wow, that stuff's just really bad. Wind up like number 4 if you keep sniffing that stuff, or if you light a cigarette or something around it, poof. So now I'm going to very carefully try to line this up and stick it down, because this contact adhesive, I'll tell you right now, it does not like to pull back up for you to replace it. Once it's there, it's pretty well there, and you may wind up having to go back and clean up that edge just a bit with some more contact adhesive. After looking at this, I think I may go ahead and clean these edges up a little bit. You can see I got a little bit of a lip on this end. Not too bad up here. I'm not going to stitch that, so I'm not going to worry about that. But here, where I'm going to stitch this, when I go to mark this off, I do want that at least a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to trim that, of course, with my little knife, and just basically follow right along the edge of my top piece, so that way I cut it off nice and flush. Now it's time to mark where I want to put my stitching. So again, I'm going to come back and find where I've stuck this down, and I'm just going to put a very light mark right there where my glue stops on both sides. And then I'm going to use this dandy little tool. This is a groover. This is adjustable. There's a screw head in here. You can unscrew this and this slides out, and what this is for is you lay this on your leather against this shaft, and then you have this piece that sticks over here, and what happens is when you pull this across your leather, it cuts a nice little groove out. And that groove makes an excellent marker for you to mark where you want to stitch, where you want to put your holes for stitching. Just like that. And it also serves another purpose. When you stitch down in that groove, of course your stitches wind up down in there below the surface of this, so that way if there's a lot of abrasion, it misses the stitches and helps your stitch last much longer. You don't have to do that step on one of these. That's strictly up to you if you don't have the groover. I really don't know of a better way to cut a groove in here without that tool, unless you're just really handy dandy with a knife here and can score yourself a groove like so, and then dig it out. So yeah, I'd probably get a groover. I think they're about 10 or 15 bucks. If you plan on doing a bunch of leather working, especially something that's going to get used well, get you one of those. So I'm going to find my mark here, and that's where I'm going to start my groove, and I'm going to just trace this thing out all the way around my perimeter where I want to put my stitch. Do the same thing on the other side, starting at my line. Okay, now it's time to mark down inside this groove where we want to put our stitch. So what I got is here is a moist paper towel. It's wet, but not just dripping wet. And what I want to do is just kind of wet this along this groove and try to get it moist down inside that groove without getting too much water in it. Okay, so that's moist, and the reason for that is because when I go hit it with this, you can get these in a couple of different sizes. This looks like a spur, and that's basically what I call it, but it's a stitch marker. I don't know its proper name, but this has a number 5 on it. So this, what that means is this is going to give me 5 stitches per inch. You can get this, I believe, in the 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, on up. Of course, the higher the number, the more stitches in an inch you get, so that means the more stitches you get within an inch, the closer together your stitches are. The lower the number, the less that you get per inch, and of course means for a wider stitch. So the purpose of this, moistening this, is I'm going to take this and I'm going to start with my first little spike at the very top of my groove, and I'm going to press and trace this groove. What that does is it rolls over that. I don't know if that shows up real well here, but you can kind of see here each low point is of course where I'm going to punch through with my needle. What you can also do without the little spur, without the stitch marker, is I always use like a scratch awl in the past, or a nail, or I just simply took a measuring tape and lined it across there and used a marker and then just put a dot for every place I wanted to punch a hole. Works great. You can do it that way. This is an easy, quick way to do it, but I always take extra precaution, because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to mark every one of these little valleys with this marker, just so I can see it better, because of course I'm about as blind as a bat. And what I have here is a little small scratch awl. This is a very small diameter. What I used in the past is I took one of these little small flathead screwdrivers and just ground the point off to a nice sharp point. Now here it is right here, and use that. The thicker you build up your leather, of course, when you punch through that, of course, the larger the hole. So I actually did go make a purchase for that. You could also use a small nail, but I find that these work pretty well because of that nice little taper. You could probably just make your own. So I just take my awl and either a poly mallet, a rawhide mallet, or even then a nice little baton of hardwood. This is some live oak off of a tree in the front yard, and I just take that, smack that all down through there, and punch it straight through both sides. So make sure you get it lined up good and straight, so that way when you punch it out, you make it inside the groove on the back side. So I'm going to go all the way around this thing with this little awl and punch out all 8 million of these little holes. Alright, so I got all my holes punched out. Some people like to just drill those holes out with a small bit. That's fine. You can do that if you prefer to do that. I don't like to do it because it fuzzes up my holes, but I have done that in the past, especially during the making of Los Bastardo. I did, because some of that leather was just so ungodly thick that, man, driving that through there, it would bury it all the way into there, and I'd have a very small hole in the back side. Okay, there's a couple of different ways that you can stitch leather. These are the different tools that you have for the job. You can simply take 2 needles and make sure you have like a waxed nylon or sinew or artificial sinew, which is basically a waxed nylon or polyester. But you want it waxed. It fills in those holes there and keeps moisture out of your holes, which will eventually ruin your leather. But what you can do is you can take these 2, and I'll just show for demonstration's sake here. I'm not going to stitch it this way because I don't like doing it, but this is good for beginners. Pull that through, and I'm actually using too heavy a thread, so let me get that in there. This is where the Leatherman comes in handy. So here's how you do that. You get your needle through there like so, and then you thread the needle through one side, pull that all the way in, and then you take this side and you put it through that same hole and pull it tight, and then you just work it all the way around like that. So that gives you a really good, solid, heavy stitch. Now the way I like to do things, get that off of there, that's the easiest way to do that. The way I like to stitch these is with an awl, or a stitching awl. Basically is a manual sewing machine. You have a nice awl, heavy needle with a groove in it for your line to slip down in. There's 2 different kinds. There's this one here with a spool like this. I prefer this kind because I can work my tension back and forth on here, and I'll show you how to do that. And there's this kind here where your tension is supposed to work around this little tack, like swirling around that, going through here, and then coming down the same thing. It's kind of the same principle, but your spool is inside, and there's really not a whole lot of control for how much tension that you can actually put on that, because I like to stitch these good and tight. I prefer them to not come apart. So what you do is you start pulling your line out, and you have enough thread around here to basically go around this 2 times. So I'm going to use about that much thread. That actually looks like a little bit of overkill. The more you work this stuff, the thicker, the thinner, the longer or shorter your thread has to be, and it's not really that big of a deal. But if you're like me, you don't like to waste a lot of stuff. So I'm going to show you how to stitch this with this. Okay, hopefully you can see this. So what I do here is I just take and punch it through that first hole, and then pull back just a little bit, and I'll get a loop on the back side of this needle. On the back side it's round, on the front side it's grooved, and that thread falls right down in there. Let's see if I can get there. So I do that, and then I pull and hang on to that line as I pull this back out. So for your very first stitch, you want to pull that line all the way through and push my awl through. Once I get it through, pull back and get my loop on the back side, which is the smooth side. And then find the end of my thread here and push it through that loop. And this is why I like this awl, because now I can rotate my spool, pull it down tight, and then when I pull this through, now that loop is going to be in between my 2 pieces of leather, and now I can pull it good and tight. This takes a bit of practice to make sure that loop stays in between as you stitch down. So now I'm going to go all the way around this thing doing that exact same thing. Over and over. It's very monotonous and repetitive. Good fun. It's good to have some good tunes in the background. But YouTube doesn't like me playing other people's music on it, so I suppose that you'll get to hear me yammer instead. So there we go. Now I got 2 good stitches in there, nice and tight. So I'm going to continue that all the way around and then show you the end result, or at least show you how to finish it off over here. Okay, so now I am down here to the end. See, and this is what I'm talking about too, with double the length around there. Sometimes that's just too much. But anyway, I've reached the end. Now how in the heck am I going to finish this off? Don't want to just pull it across and tie a knot and burn the ends? Yeah, I suppose you could do that, but it's ugly. So what you do is you just start doubling back and stitching over here. Okay, so I've gotten it all the way back here now. I'm going to pull a little extra back. I'm going to cut this off just to make it simple so you can see it. Okay, so I would normally have my awl attached right here. So now that I have this where I want it, I come in with some scissors and I'm going to cut that flush with my leather right there, both sides, without tugging on it. I don't want to tug on it, because if I do that, I'm going to pull my loop back through and I'm going to have a fuzzy mess on the end. So there we go. Now those are flushed through there. You could probably cut yourself a little tag off, and I did that on Los Bastardo, because I wanted to make darn sure that stuff didn't come apart. And so far I have not had any issues with even doing it this way, but I just cut it off flush here on both sides and then go back with my awl and then just tuck that end right down inside the hole. Just stuff it down in there. And if you're a advanced delusional paranoid schizophrenic with involuntary narcissistic rage, yes, that was me, myself, and Irene, you could drop yourself a little dab of epoxy or super glue or something in there to completely lock that down if you're afraid that that's going to come apart. But that should not come apart. If it does, it's got 2 other stitches to go through, and then you can burn the ends or whatever you wanted to do later on. But there we go. The pouch is stitched up. I'm happy with that. That ought to work out pretty well. You've seen my zombie slayer video and the probably even the pics I posted on Lost by Stardo and all the comments on that of how I did that. And if you know me by now, I don't use a lot of patterns for anything. It usually goes flying by the seat of my pants, because as I'm sitting here stitching up stuff like this, it takes a while and my thoughts start rolling. And the first thing I was sitting there thinking about is how much, after I used this for a while, when you have this clipped to your belt loop and you're trying to get to the tool in there, you got to try to slide this grommet up here and then unhook and then get to that. And when it's on your belt loop and you're trying to do that with one hand, it's kind of a pain in the butt. So while I was sitting here thinking about that, it's like, man, do I really want to go through with that and do that like that, making this one? And I thought to myself, no, I don't. No, I really don't. So now, if I would have thought about that beforehand, I would have, when I cut my back piece, I would have shaped it with a little tag coming up where I can just fold that tag over and rivet it on here for a loop to loop my carabiner, because I like the idea of that being real versatile, where I can string it on my neck or on my belt loop or whatever, rather than trying to loop a belt through it. I like the idea of the carabiner. That's the whole point. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to figure out a way of how I want to do this with a scrap piece of leather and put a loop on the top of that flap. It's probably going to work just exactly the way I was planning on doing with a tag. I would just loop it over and then rivet that on there. It's probably going to require a little glue so it doesn't slip back and forth, or I could simply just glue it down and then run a couple of stitches across there to hold it into place. And then I was sitting there thinking, if I do that, then this is going to flap around open, and if I have fire steels or whatever else in here, they could fall out if it swings far enough over. So I'm going to incorporate a snap right here that I can snap it shut if I want to make sure that it stays closed. So I'm going to ponder over that a little bit, and then we'll get started on how we're going to modify that. Okay, so here's the idea I've come up with. I got a little piece of scrap leather here that I've kind of dressed the edges out with. Man, I really wish I would have had this little tag up here that I could just fold over and just be done with it. But since I'm going to incorporate snaps in here, I've got to come up with something here where I'm not going to interfere with how the snaps attach to this. So this is what I've come up with here, is I'm going to take this and fold it like so. I'm going to glue it down right like so, and then put a rivet here where my 2 fingers are, and then down here toward the bottom, so that way this doesn't swivel out, and that should be able to get me what I need. And since I decided to do snaps later and this later, it's actually would have been in my best interest to do that before I would have stamped this on, but luckily here there's enough flap to work with that it shouldn't get in the way and shouldn't be too much of a problem. So I'll show you how we're going to attach that. You've already seen the glue process, so I am going to mark on here my placement where I want it. And here comes the fun part. We're going to punch holes in this. So what I want to do here is mark this where I want my holes with a marker. There and there. That ought to give me good equal spacing, or a decent spacing, so I don't get a bunch of twists or anything like that in there. Now, like I said before, this would have been ideal to do that before I stitched this down, so now I have to make up for that. Now, how you do the punch is you get your rivet, which I'm going to be using this little shorty. Let's see here, the camera doesn't want to focus. And I really wanted to use nickel ones because it would look prettier, I think, with silver, but well, I didn't have any of the shorties left in there, so kudos to me for being unprepared. So anyway, the post, the diameter of that, you want it to pretty well match your punch. And now I go just a little bit larger because the leather is actually going to withdraw a little bit, and you want a good tight fit in there when you do that. And luckily the same should work out for my snaps. So let's punch these holes, and I'll show you how to set this stuff. There, that went through. You hear the change in sound. Oh yeah, it's a much cleaner hole too. So now move this on the other side, punch those holes out. Let's get us some rivets in that. Okay, so here's what we do for the rivets. And it'll basically be the same thing for the snap. I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to put that post through the back side, like so. And then I'm actually going to use this aluminum deal, but these all come with little ambles. It's flat on one side, it's beveled on the inside. And then you could put that in there and then hammer that, but for that I don't really need it. Normally I just do this on a flat surface and it's good and clean. So I'm going to slip this aluminum underneath there and then put my little cap on the top. Now on the driver or post or whatever the heck they call this thing, it's flat on one end and it's also beveled on this side. The bevel side should match the curve to that pretty well. So if you try to use one that's too long, instead of it coming down straight like so, you're going to wind up with it cockeyed like that, and that's going to mess things up and make it ugly. So I use one that just barely pokes out over the top of the leather. So I'm going to put this straight down, and then what I do to get it started is just give it a couple of good taps. And that starts to bend. The idea here is when you take that little post and put this top on here, and then you start hammering that down, that post will flare out just inside that, and it locks that cap down on it. So I'm going to pop the rest of these rivets on here, and then we're going to do some snaps. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark for my snap and where I want my snap to go. I figure I want my snap up high enough to where it gives me more space down inside here, but if I put it down real low, then it gives me less space in here and it gives me a good handle up here. So I think I'm going to put it right about here, just so that way I've got enough to grab onto up here. My knife should still fit down in there real well, and it should snap up above it. So hopefully that shall work out. So I'm going to mark back here where I want my snap, and I'm going to go right about there. And I'm going to use my same punch. Now, if you don't own a punch, you can make your own punch, and it's really quite easy to do. If you got any kind of steel tube, something like this, and I have done this in the past before I bought a punch, any kind of steel tube, whatever size that you want, you can just take that on a bench grinder and just start running it on an angle there until you get a good sharp round edge, and then you can punch that straight down on there. Works like a charm. So there's a little quick lesson on making your own tools for that. So I'm going to punch this hole out for the snap, same way I did for the rivets here. Now I'm going to lay that down flat, and then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to mark it inside that hole, so that way I have it centered on the opposite end. And now I don't need this because I'm not going to be punching through excess leather. So now I'll punch it on this end. Now my snap holes are ready to go. Now doing a snap works pretty well the same way as a rivet, except you have 4 different kinds of pieces here. This is the male end, and this is the female end. It'll snap over just like so. Now you're going to want the male end on the back side, and when you do that, there's 2 different kinds of posts. There's one with a flat edge, and there's also one with a rounded top, and of course that usually goes on the front. So we'll match the rounded one with the female side, set it aside, that'll go on the front, and the male end with the flat one. And it works exactly the same way. You just put the post through there, and then you have a different setter for that one. It has a cylindrical shape here, and then a point that comes out, and what happens is that point goes down in that shaft, and as you drive it down, it will flare that shaft over and catch it right on that lip down inside that. So here's the anvil that you use for a snap. It's the same one that I showed you that you could set a rivet with, and since I'm going to be putting that snap here and this gets in the way, I am going to use the anvil. On the back side, I'm going to use the shaft that has the flat back, push it through that hole, and I'm going to lay that right on top of the flat side of that anvil. I'm going to put this up here over that shaft, and then now I'm going to be ready to set that with my setter. Now the thing about a snap is you have to, I found the best way to work the snap, make sure you're centered, is when I'm setting this, I'm going to take this and just slightly rotate it around in a circle and get that flare started, and just tapping it lightly, so that way it drives it down straight, or else my snaps don't line up and then I wind up with a bend in my leather when it snaps down and it looks nasty. So I'm just going to kind of work that a little bit with the hammer and really get that rotated in there, and then drive it straight in. And then check to make sure I'm getting my bevel going, and I am. I know you can't see it, but trust me, it's starting. So that's what you'll want to watch for when you're setting a snap. Okay, so now I got my edge really going nice and straight, so now I can start just rolling that end over. Just go straight down. Straight down into it, and it looks like it shifted just a bit, but it's not off bad enough to really make a major problem. So, and again, it's thinner leather, and the shafts on these are just too long for the kind of leather I'm working with here. So I'm going to do the same thing on the front side, except I'm going to put that nice rounded piece on the front, the female end on the back, but this time I'm going to flip my anvil over so that way I have my indentation. And I'm going to set that head right down that indentation. Now this one's more difficult to do than the back side, because if you don't get that perfectly centered down in there, it's going to be at an angle,
and you're going to wind up setting it crooked for sure. So you're going to make sure you're in there good and straight, and that shaft is completely straight up and down. And I'm going to do this the same way, just a few light taps. It gets it started in the right position. So there we go. Snap set. We have us a pouch. Alright, so our leather pouch is made. Pretty sweet. So, yeah, it's a little rough around the edges. You know, the snap's a little crooked, but, you know, that's what you get. You know, I haven't really found any snaps with shorter shafts, or I would have less issues, but if I find some one day, I'll get some. But here, I want to go ahead, I want to go ahead and soften the leather, so I'm going to work that leather a little bit and loosen those fibers a little bit, because I like it to be able to put whatever I want into it. It's a good multi-purpose knife sheath. It's not just for a knife. You can put a fire kit in here or whatever you want. Pretty darn cool. You can, if you want to tool it and put a good carved design in here, you can do that before you stitch all this stuff together. And you can stamp your initials in there or whatever. I will probably use a permanent marker and do a colored design on here because I like the way that looks better. You can score it with your knife and bend it back. Bend that score back a little bit with after you moisten it down a little bit, give you nice little cuts. That's what I did on the Zombie Slayer. And then go in there with different markers. To treat it, you can use some good old mink oil. It'll soften that leather. It won't ruin your tooling, and it'll also give it weather resistance as well and help preserve that leather. Or if you would like to have a color like this and this came from the exact same hide. The same hide. And how I got that color is I used olive oil. I put a couple of coats of olive oil in there, let it soak in real good, and then over time it will turn this color. You can put it out in the sun and it will start that color a little bit quicker. All different kinds of ways to treat your leather. Mink oil is probably the best, olive oil second best, but then again, there's a lot of people that use olive oil to treat all their leather products, and you can even use it to treat your carbon steel knives. So let's just make sure, since we're sitting here talking about all this stuff, see if the knife fits. Like a glove. Fits like a glove. Beautiful. I love it. Now, with the tooling leather, you can also moisten the leather down, not too much, but enough to get it good and pliable where it'll retain its shape, which is also the same method you use in tooling it and stamping it. If you moisten that leather, you can actually pinch this in and work it real good with some sort of plastic edge, and you can form this thing to the exact shape of your knife where your knife will click in place. And if you do that, you don't even need the snaps, and it's almost like a natural kydex when you do that. It especially works with the heavier leathers, and this one would work just fine. So if you make one of these yourself, if you would film that, I'd appreciate that if you would do that and give me a video response to it. I'd like to see what kind of modifications you come up with, what your preliminary design is, and if you follow through with it as well. That'd be pretty cool. I'd like to see what you guys make. So go get you some leather, get you some scrap. You can make it out of scrap. Make some stuff. Let me know what you make. I don't know, I'd like to see it. It'd just be awesome. So until then, go out there, get dirty, have fun, be safe, and don't stick your fingers with the needle. Ouch. Well, I'll catch you guys later. Have a good evening.